email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or
The
news.
single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
Welcome back to part 3 of my discussion with Teresa Lynch, Vice President of Field Operations at Lennar. We pick up the conversation with Teresa sharing some strategies for managing and resolving conflicts within a team.
So I used to have an arm wrestling corner, but that was, I used to say that. No, you can't do that virtually. It's so funny because I was actually very blessed that when we started working together, I worked for Young Brands and they had such a team focused culture. And they had things called the how we work together principles. And, they team together, team apart, meaning when we are in a room and we decide something, like we are all going to support that when we leave, right? Trusting and positive intentions. My point in this, that when we think about the internal problems that can arise and how we treat each other, having those guiding principles of how we're going to work through conflict are really important. And so I tend to start every project with a list of guiding principles that include lots of them from Young Brands, right? Like, we're going to trust in positive intentions. We're going to trust that everybody's coming at this with the same goal, right? The conflict may come in how we get there. The conflict may come from something, but we're all going to trust that it's not this personal, political, I'm trying to stab you in the back thing, right? Because as your leader, my job, if I see that, is to get rid of that, right? So we're going to trust our positive intentions. We're all going to come at this team together, team apart. We're all going to come at this and say, look, if we get in this room and we decide we're going to support each other outside of this room, which means that conflict has to be okay. So we're going to let each person have their say. We're not going to interrupt. We're going to listen to what it is. We're going to figure out together what's going to work for the outcome that we need. And that's what we're going to align around. And we're going to support that, whether you perceive you win or lost. We're going to support what this team decides when we leave this room. And though I start every project, every charter, these are our guiding principles. We look at those before we have our weekly meetings, like, hey, conflict's okay, bring it up. Like, let's bring it up. And when you're physically in a room, you can facilitate it out of people. You can get them into that place. Yeah. Again, it's a little tougher on teams. Like, you really have to, come up with strategies around, look, I'm going to let somebody else present so that I can actually watch the room, right? I can watch the people on the project. I can, physically see when somebody's disengaged. It's important yet you have your camera on. It's important that you really make sure you can see the people and how are they engaged? Are they doing 5 things at once? Like, if this project is important to them, I assure you, you're not doing emails or, scrolling through Instagram on your phone. Like, you're here and you're having this conversation. You can see people. And I'm a huge believer of getting people, every project manager, facilitation trained. There's multiple facilitation, opportunities out there to know how to read a group, know how to facilitate that conflict into the center. That I think is such a good skill set, regardless of what you're doing, and know how to facilitate it back. And so, I think those are things that have to happen, but I think the guiding principles and all agreeing up front to that are really important. I also think that writing it down, and this is so old school, like this is another very old school thing, but flip charts, notes, and writing it down where people can see what you're writing so that they can react to it is really important, because people will react more to things in writing than they will what you say. Right. Yep. And so being able to write something down and so I go, that's not actually what I meant, or I don't actually agree with that. That's an easier conversation than, did I hear you correctly? I don't like what you said. Like, it's just easier if you're writing it down. So whether it's a flip chart, whether it's notes on Teams, having somebody scribing at all times so that project team members can react to that, I think is also really important.
Oh, yeah, for sure. 100% agree with that. What about external problems? Can you share any challenges or maybe a project you worked on that tested your leadership and skills and how you navigated through it?
There have been many. There have been many tests over the years. Yeah, I can think of a couple. One was, I spent some time doing project management and building project management skills internationally. And culturally, some cultures are more aligned with risk mitigation and risk management than others. And, being able to go into a country where culturally you do not give them bad news and have to find a way to explain to them that, their project is not going well. Their project is not going to happen the way they want, and not being 1000% completely silenced, because it is not okay to say that out loud. And as a female, that was, just a kicker on top of it. Like, not only do we not want to hear bad news, we certainly don't want to hear it from a woman. You're the person that sits at the table behind the table, but that, figuring out how to flex your communications and your styles, whether it's another country or another consultant or, somebody externally, that is always a challenge. And I think that's where, Steve White, I worked for him at Comcast, always said, leaders are lifelong learners. You have to be willing to continue to learn. You can't just be like, nope. So this is how I do it. And I need you all to get on board. Like, you have to continue to find the gray. You have to continue to find that space. And, I was in that situation recently with an external partner trying to put together, a combined project plan, and, just two very, very different ways of doing it. And as you all heard my soapbox earlier, I really believe in how we look at project management and how we do it. I really believe in the project success method. I really believe in forward planning. And so when people, come from a very different place and you have to figure out how to get them there, it can be a struggle. And I'm, as a leader, you have to not want to dig in your heels, right? You can't just say like, well, but I know I'm right. Like, I know this is the way to do it. So, in that instance, it was a lot of, okay, let me take a step back and let me figure out where we cross over and we're the same. So let's figure out what is similar in how we want to do it and what we do. And let's kind of start there. Okay. Now let's talk through what the outcome will be if we continue down this path versus this path. Like, how do we get them on board and engage at the level of the management style that we're going to use? Because what I found is it was wreaking havoc on the teams, right? Your team's going this way, my team's going this way. We all have to go here. Like, we can't. So how do we figure out that management style, that planning style first? Then it really started evolving into how do we actually even get to what the strategies and the processes are, right? So now it gets into the work. So great, I have a plan to get to the work, but is the work I'm getting to even the same? And that goes back to that. They didn't want to do a charter. They didn't want to, hey, that's, so that's.
Everybody knows. Everybody understands.
Right.
That's what they always say.
So then it's like, okay. And in fairness, we had to start over. Like, we lost probably a year and had to start over. And, that's, I don't relish saying that out loud. Like, that's terrible. Like, but it didn't matter how many times I said, we're going to lose a year. It didn't matter how many times I said, this is not how we should head down this. We're going to lose a year. We're going to lose people. We're going to lose, we got to get there. Sometimes you just have to keep pulling it back in, keep pulling it back in, keep pulling it back in. And what I can hold my head up and say is everybody knew that I knew it would take this long. Like, my leadership knows, like, I wasn't, to your point, I didn't show up one day and be like, oh yeah, we should have done X, Y, and Z. And at the end of the day, when you're working with partners, all of that to be said, okay, yep, we could have gotten there, but what we learned about each other, what we learned and how we want to get that done, what we learned about the work, what we learned about what we would do and wouldn't do, we now have a chance to say, okay, great. Well, we had a chance, after that year to say, great, this is we're together. We're locked arms. We're going to make this happen. And so sometimes those learnings take longer than a 3-day planning session, and it's not great. But we figured out where our art is, working together in that particular project. We figured out how we wanted to accomplish it together, and then moved forward from there. And so there's a couple ways to get there.
Yeah, I think if I think back to your answer to the previous question, what you were describing, I would just call group consensus. And group consensus is where let's say you and I disagree on a topic. You say we should go left and I say we should go right. And I'm very stubborn. You're very strong-willed. Neither one of us are going to give up on our position. The rest of the team, though, agrees with you that we should go right. So then what that tells me is I will agree to help you move in the wrong direction because you didn't change my mind. I still think left is the way to go. But to your point, as a team member, I agree to support you in moving in that direction, which I still believe to be the wrong one, but I will support you in going in that direction. That's what you're really looking for, is you got everybody moving in the same direction as opposed to 10 going one direction and 2 going the other direction. Mm-hmm. You're trying to get that group consensus, even if you don't everybody would love to have 100% agreement, but sometimes you're not going to change my mind. What you have to do is just get me to agree to help support you in moving in the direction you think the team thinks we should move into.
Right. And that you're not just agreeing because you're sitting here with me and the team, right? When you're sitting at the executive lunch over here, you're like, yep, that's the way we're headed. And I support that. I don't necessarily agree with it. I support it. Like, I'm going to support this out loud with everybody.
Yeah. That's actually one of the arguments we use for having the in-person sessions is you want that argument to come out, mm-hmm. because what we know is if you don't have that argument today, you're going to fight that battle over and over and over again throughout the life of the project. But if you get them in the room, either virtually or face to face, and you have that conversation and you get the people to have state their piece of why it should be left or why it should be right. And then everybody else understands why Clint thinks the way he does. And he's agreed to support us moving in the direction he still thinks is wrong, but he at least heard our say and he's agreed to help support us. And so that way you don't have fight the same battle continuously.
Yes. I think absolutely. I agree. The ideal state and the one that is most successful is in person.
Yeah, for sure. And we've certainly found that if you can just spend that initial planning session time up front together, the rest of the project can be done virtually because of the relationships you build and the bonds you build and the trust in the collaboration you build in that first session can then carry over for multiple years of execution. It's that first planning session, which is where I get to know you and I change you from an email address to a living, breathing person that I feel some connection to. Right.
Right. And one of the things that I push on, and not everybody agrees with me, you might not agree with me, is when I have those in-person sessions, I make them fairly large. Like, I want to make sure that as many people who are engaging in this project can be there as possible. Right. And I think sometimes we don't need them, just the key executives, right? Or we don't, just the key couple of leaders of the teams. I'm like, we really need to invest in that up front. And I know it feels like a lot, and I know it seems like a lot. And I know they're like, they should be focused on the work. Mm-hmm. But they're going to be more focused if we can have that conversation now and not be like picking them up along the way, right? It feels like you're picking up passengers along the way, and then you're the person on the bus who's given the spiel and you're giving it over and over again. And everybody hears it a little different each time. So if we all hear it together and we're all on the bus at the same together and we all leave at the same time, it's just a much more, positive path to success than just trying it the hard way. Right.
Yeah. I think that it's a number of times I've had somebody who's come to one of my training classes at a client we worked at for a long period of time, and they'll be there and they'll say, oh, so that's why they wanted to know this. And, oh, so that's why they asked that. And they just didn't understand. And so then it becomes just another item on their to-do list. It's just one more thing that the man is using to put me down, mm-hmm. right? So it's just micromanagement in their heads. Until they understand the benefit, until they see the big picture of why you're doing what you're doing, they won't understand that. And that makes it a lot tougher.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So we shift away from really more project specific questions as I kind of wrap up. Just a couple more. So how do you stay updated on industry standards and incorporate new technologies and methodologies into your workflow?
I think I said it a second ago, leaders are always learners, right? So it's important. It's important to try to understand the new stuff coming. I'll be honest, there's nothing, I think you said earlier, like project management tools, strategic management frameworks, like there's nothing so drastically different, right? That necessarily comes down the pike. There's always going to be new ways of implementing, right? There's going to be new tools. There's going to be new software. There's going to be new processes, but I actually am lifelong tied to those core principles, that we've been talking about. And those don't change. And so, I love finding the different ways that people have looked at them and turned them on their side and turned them on their head. And there's all kinds of ways for that. And I will, I'll read articles and books and trade publications. I spend a lot of time talking to people that are doing other projects and other project work. And, I got great advice from somebody to have what is kind of called a round table or a kitchen table or whatever you want to call it, of people in your life for multiple reasons, right? I have a CFO that I work with who gives me guidance on sort of business industry things. I have a mom that was a really good friend of mine that keeps me grounded when it comes to how I work and with my kids. And I've got PM and PMO leaders who, and people like you who I follow and watch, and, read this really, really great book recently by this guy, Clint that was fantastic, called How Teams Triumph. But like,
shameless plug.
Right. But like, those are the things, right? Staying engaged. And I have really good, tight relationships with a lot of people I've worked with that are PMs and in the PM space. And we talk a lot about what's working, what's not working, right? What are they doing? What's working really well with them? What have they tried implementing recently? What's a new technology? What's a new process? How's that working out for them? I'm still pretty old school. I like what I like. I haven't found anything fantastically new that has come in over the top to change, for me to change the game, right? That somehow gets rid of the things that we already do at the core. There's some lovely things that make some of those things easier, tools, things like that we'll try. I'm to the point where I just build my own now. I feel like we've learned so much over time. There's always these little pieces missing. So yeah.
So looking ahead, what emerging trends or challenges do you see in the world of project management, and how do you prepare yourself and your team for that?
I mean, I think we talked about part of it, which is this whole notion of virtual. How do you build cohesive teams in a virtual environment? How do you even get tools that really, really, work for everyone the way that we need them to work for everyone? How do you get people to get into one place and have that kickoff meeting and have that charter and really kick off the project? So I think the virtual piece is probably the biggest sort of workplace trend that is impacting that successful project. I think the other thing for me that is really interesting as people who know my background will ask me to help look at project managers or look at their teams or, give them some coaching and advice. And I'm amazed how many people are like, well, here was the work I did, but I went and I got my certification and now I'm a PM and I'm going to manage this, $1 million project over here. And you're like, okay, well, that's interesting. So let's talk about that, right? Let's talk about how do you connect the dots? But that seems to be a little bit of a thing right now that I've seen, that it's less of a dot connecting project manager. I like to manage projects, and more of a, well, I have this thing and it says PM in my title, and therefore I'm going to get shoved into this really big project. And so I think what that tells me is, one, we don't have enough, trained project managers out there. And so there's a lot of folks who want to get in that space, and there's a lot of project work to do. And we need companies to spend the time understanding, it's not just that's great and you can learn a lot, but there's an experience that you need to have to ensure that success. And so how do you focus on that? So I do a lot of coaching about, how to bring those people in. I think the other workplace trend that I think is really interesting right now is we're not going to call them projects. I don't know if you've noticed this, but
I have not. No.
Yeah. So a few people are like they've invested in portfolio management offices, but they have lists of what they refuse to call projects anymore because projects somehow got a bad name in terms of how they were being validated or how they, like, a very interesting, and I heard it from somebody recently and I was like, well, that must be like a you thing, right? Like your company thing. That's very interesting. And then I heard it again. I was like, wait. And I think it's because this notion of PMOs or project management offices, you and I both know it comes and goes, right? It's a good thing. It's a bad thing. It's a good thing. It's a bad thing. It must be kind of circling in the, it's not a great thing right now. Like for some companies, like how they justify that work. But, you hear it in terms of strategic execution. You hear it as and so I think what it is that people are trying to make everything a project. And so you can't call it a project, which part of me appreciates because it means you want to look at it and manage it well. The other part is like, okay, but now you're going to get back to the place where people don't understand it and they don't know what it means. So that's a trend that I'm really working to where I'm at, make sure that we're clear on what we're calling a project. We're clear on what we're talking, we use our project managers for. There's all kinds of processes to be built. There's all kinds of process engineering. Like, how does that fit? And making sure at least my team and my leadership understands where we're at in my coaching and guiding, trying to help folks understand, like, hey, this is what a strategic framework looks like. And here's, yes, a project absolutely can be a part of strategy to execution. It's a lot of where I've implemented it. But at the same time, there's a lot of other things in that. There's the culture, there's all of these other pieces. And so, it'll be interesting to see where that goes. It's, I feel like it's such a cycle of how people feel about it. So. Yeah.
I think project offices sometimes get a bad name because they end up being about governance. And they don't really help you get stuff done. Right. And to me, that's where all of a sudden it becomes, oh, here comes the PMO, which means did I tick this box and I do that? And that's not what this is about, as you and I both know. Yeah. And there are certainly skills that we build in this role that we play. And we want to use those skills everywhere because we're really good at these things. But to me, the way that I describe a project is if the deadline matters, then it's a project. Yeah. If the deadline doesn't matter, you can spend as long as you want on it. Right. Then, okay, you probably don't need the rigor that we're going to talk about. And you don't need to meet every week to update the plan because deadlines don't matter. But if deadlines matter and you're going to lose your job if you don't make it, then okay, the rigor we're talking about probably makes sense.
Yeah, that's a great point. Absolutely.
And I think the other challenge with virtual, which I have nothing against virtual, and I know there's a role for that. We've always used virtual for our updates, but there's a trade-off. Yeah, you don't have to fly together, and that saves some money. But to me, you're less efficient, you're less effective because, as you said, I'm going to go off, I'm going to get this piece of information, I'm going to go work on it, I'm going to bring it back, present it. This is what you meant. No, now I have to go off again. Now somebody else sees it because that's not what I meant. And if we're all in a room together, you have that conversation once and it's done, right? Exactly. And somebody once asked me, or more recently asked me about AI. I'm like, dude, as long as people are involved in projects, AI is not taking it over. Because what you talked about earlier, if Joe has 3 kids this weekend, AI is not going to know that. I mean, I'm sure there's a role for AI, but it's not on the people side of managing projects for sure.
Agree completely.
All right, I got 3 last questions I ask everybody as we finish them up. Are there any leadership principles that speak to you personally and guide your day-to-day behaviors?
Yeah. I think I mentioned it earlier. I think, in looking at the 5 dysfunctions of the team, I think that notion of vulnerability, for me, it's key. It was great coaching that I got from a leader that I worked for. I was coming into a new role and he had put me directly on his leadership team. And I think there were some folks that were like, why? It was a PMO role and they didn't understand the value of it. They heard PMO and heard, oh my gosh, governance. And I think my take on that is I am not about the red tape, right? But he said that the way you're going to join this already very cohesive team is you're going to have to be vulnerable, and it's going to be scary, and it's going to be hard. And he was not wrong at all. It was scary and it was hard, but the payback of that, the payback of how quickly I became a part of something bigger, how quickly my team became a part of something bigger, was pretty eye-opening. And so I latched onto that. I latched onto that as a critical way of how you build a team, of how you lead, of how you bring your presence in for your team. I tend to be a servant leader. I tend to be someone who, you have heard me say things like, I want to have their back. I want to be their warrior. I'm there to, shield them from the nonsense so that they can go effectively get their work done. I think if you talk to, my newer teams, they would tell you similar things, that at the end of the day, they know I am not going to lead them into the fire. I am going to do what I need to do to make them be successful, not just for the work that has to be successful, but for themselves. I always say, like, the day that I will, feel best about my leadership is when I am working for the people that I grew. Like that's my job. My job is to clear a path for you, give you a skill set, give you the support, bring you into these projects, help you make them successful so that you can go right on past me. Like I am just fine coming in one day and working for these amazing, talented people that I have been blessed to have around me. So
that's phenomenal. Yet another reason I like to work for you. So what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
I was going to try to come up with something super funny for this, Clint, but I really couldn't. I've gotten a lot of good advice over the year. I do feel incredibly blessed that the people I am lucky enough to call mentors and friends and colleagues, like I just talk about a who's who and just this amazing opportunity of the incredibly bizarro career that I feel like I've cobbled together over the last 30 years. But I think I would have to say it was probably my mom, who was one of the best leaders, not just of our family, but was in banking for a long time and at the university after. But she said her version of it, right? The Indiana mom version of it is you catch more flies with honey. I think the Yum Brands version of it is trust and positive intentions. I think that there's a million ways to say it. And I think too often, and I'll a little bit of the female leadership thing here, too often as women, I think we jump into situations and feel like we're supposed to be this like gruff, like I can't be vulnerable. I can't show any niceness. I have to like really just like, that's the only way I'm going to be listened to. It's the only way I'm going to be taken seriously is I'm going to have to lay it on the line and do all of these things. And when I say things like catch more flies with honey, people are like, oh, that just sounds like such a girl thing. Like no, what it means at the end of the day is that when I come into any situation with a project team, a leadership team, anybody, my job is to find the way to speak to somebody that makes them feel valued, right? Like, I don't need to pick a fight with you. You said earlier, you can be going right. I can be going left. I don't have to pick a fight about it. For me, the way to get there together is to understand you, to approach you in a way that is not going to send you running for the hills. Like, my kids will tell you I don't always catch flies with honey with them, but it to me is the best advice. I'm not going to say I am 100% great at doing it all the time, but it is the best advice when, you're dealing with people. Like, you don't need to be all salty and draw a hard line. And what is that? Where does it ever get anywhere? Like, okay, great. So you look tough. Okay. Yay for you. Like, great. That's not what it's about. So it's about getting them together.
Yeah. I think if I look at the situation, I remember somebody said recently that people often don't remember what you said, but they remember how you made them feel. And am I going to want to follow the person that is basically hitting me over the head with a stick? Yeah, I'm going to go there because I have no choice. Or am I going to follow the person that's saying, here's why it's going to be helpful for you. Here's why we should do this together. And here's how it's going to benefit the organization. So one is leading and one is pushing. I'd rather be led than pushed.
Yeah.
All right. Last question. So what's the best book or article you've read recently? What was the key takeaway?
I've been reading a lot of fiction, Clint. I'm not sure that's applicable. You laugh, and I'm not trying to plug your book, but How Teams Triumph is actually such a great book. I think it so speaks to the people side, right? And so I'm a huge proponent. I actually just bought it for my team to read in my new role, and my new PM that's on board. I'm excited because I think I tend to hire people that understand that, but really, really getting into how it fits, right? Not just this sort of, I can talk about people all day long, but really, really how it fits. And that I think is critical. I also went back and I had read The Talent Code a while ago. I don't know if you've read that book. It's a thick book. But it really is how it gets into this entire scientific piece of how you unlock talent, right? Can you unlock talent by repetition? And so for me, I started, I kind of read it a few years ago now, I guess, and super interested to try to implement some things with some teams and, was really excited about it. And then I was thinking recently as we continue to expand my team and grow it and our roles continue to evolve because we're a new team, I was like, okay, how do I really, really now go back and look at that and think about talent slightly more broadly and think about it in terms of what I can do for not just our team, but for them, right? When we look at our development plans and we're looking at how we grow our people and we give them that next experience, what does that mean? And are there things that I can learn with that? So I was kind of doing a refresher on that to see if there's some little things that I can learn and continue to bring as a leader for the people around me.
I might have to look that book up. That sounds interesting. The Talent Code. All right. Well, Teresa, this has really been great. You and I go way back, and I knew this conversation would be a little bit longer than my typical one, but I really enjoyed it. If somebody wants to learn more about you or Lenore, how can they do that?
Great question.
Lenore.com.
Yeah. LinkedIn. Right. I'm I don't know. How could they, certainly LinkedIn, Lenore.com. They can absolutely go check it out. We've got communities all over this country that are super great. And as a company, again, I will tell you, just blessed with the culture. It is such a great culture there. So very excited.
Well, Teresa, this has been great. Thanks so much for the conversation.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation. To find out more about Clint, go to clintonmpaget.com and pick up Clint's book, How Teams Triumph, Managing by Commitment, at Amazon. The Conversation with Clinton M. Paget is a production of Forbes Books.